You got a Bible? Luke 5 is where we're going to be today, so I'd invite you to turn there. We'll talk about Peter for a little bit this morning. Peter was a pretty normal boy growing up, most likely. Don't know anything really about his childhood, and so probably a pretty unspectacular kind of childhood. Normal boy, normal family, normal life, grew up just like all the other little boys around his hometown. Grew up near a lake. Dad was a fisherman, most likely. Mom probably stayed home to keep the house and to take care of all the kids. Peter would have grown up to be a child who knew some scripture. He was probably, like everybody else in that part of the world, would have gone to synagogue every Saturday, every time the doors were open. Probably would have learned the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, on through Deuteronomy. As a child, would have memorized the Psalms, would have prayed the Psalms like all the other boys. And so he knew some scripture, knew some Bible, but probably wasn't ever going to do much with it. Dad was probably a fisherman, and during that time, you just kind of did what your dad did. And so Peter was destined to be a fisherman. Knew the Bible, but he was going to have a real job. And so he eventually gets married and starts to have this family. His mother-in-law at some point gets sick. That's in Luke chapter 4, near the end of it. Well, mother-in-law moves in with Peter and his wife, and sure that went well. But other than that, life is pretty unspectacular for Peter. Not a whole lot's going on. Not a whole lot to write home about. Fish 6 days a week, go to church on Saturday, wake up Sunday morning and do the whole thing again. Well, one Saturday, Jesus comes to town, guest preacher is there, and so Peter goes down to the synagogue to hear what he has to say. Probably a pretty big moment in their life because Jesus was building a reputation. We saw that last week. He'd been healing folks and helping people, and whenever he shows up and preaches, you probably want to be there in attendance. If that's your only Sunday to go or Saturday to go, then you probably ought to go. And so Peter goes, and Jesus says some things from that pulpit that would have been extraordinary. Sometimes they comforted folks, and sometimes they caused folks to want to murder him. And so Jesus says some things that are shocking, but more shocking is what happens in the church lobby that morning. If you read the end of Luke chapter 4, there's a man with a demon, and Jesus sees that, notices that, and he does what he always does. There's a demon there, and he's got to cast it out. And so Jesus steps down from the pulpit, goes to the church lobby, speaks the demon out of existence. Peter's impressed. And so also in the end of Luke chapter 4, Peter invites Jesus home to supper. So they're going to go home on that Saturday and have a meal together at Peter's house. Peter's there. Peter's wife is there. Peter's mother-in-law is there. But lo and behold, mother-in-law is sick. She has a fever. And so Jesus does what Jesus normally does when somebody's there and they're sick and they've got a fever. He speaks to the fever and casts it out. And so Jesus is still in the process of healing people. Well, the crowd start hearing about it. Before you know it, at the end of Luke chapter 4, they're coming from all over the place because Jesus is there in Peter's house, lines forming out the door, and Jesus is just ready to go to a secluded place and get away from the people sometimes. But how could they not show up? When you think about it, I told you all that real quick to set the scene of how could they not show up? If you hear that the guest preacher, Jesus, is in town and he's got a history of healing people, and you got sick people in your family, and you got hurting people, and you got people who can't walk and can't see, then why would I not show up? When I hear that Jesus has done so much for so many people, how can you not go? And so people show up. People show up because they know who Jesus is, and they know what Jesus brings. They're lining up outside Peter's door. He's had so much of an impact on their lives. How could they not line up? How could anything be more important? Well, one day, Luke chapter 5, verse 1 is where we'll begin. One day, Jesus is out preaching on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Gennesaret. It goes by different names. And so the crowds are amassed in Luke chapter 5. But you know who's not there? It's interesting to me who's in the crowd, but it's really interesting to me who's not in the crowd. Chapter 5, verse 1, on one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Doesn't sound like much, just kind of sounds like some normal, everyday details of a story. But for some strange reason, there's a crowd forming around Jesus who heals people and helps people, saves people, speaks truth to people, and who's not in the crowd is Peter. Jesus is preaching the word, and Peter is over there fixing his nets. He's in his boat. And it seems crazy to me that after Jesus has done so much to help people, not just people, he's done so much to help Peter's family, that Jesus is disinteresting to Peter. Not very compelling to Peter. Peter is disinterested. Jesus is on the shore preaching the gospel and the good news to all these people, and Peter's over there in his boat, not listening, not interested, not really paying attention to what Jesus is saying. He's just over in his boat. Have you ever been in the same boat? That boat sound familiar to you? You know Jesus. Maybe he's even had some kind of impact on your life. You know who Jesus is. Everybody around here does. This is not the kind of place in the world, in our little corner of it, this is not the place where paganism thrives or secularism thrives. Is it? Maybe it is. And maybe we're just a bit disinterested with Jesus. Well, everybody here knows Jesus. We all know the stories. We probably all got a Bible at home. Everybody in this part of the world does. We're in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt in this part of the world. There's a church on every corner. That's great. But the church rolls are declining all over the place. Little churches in the country are kind of shutting their doors, and the members are dispersing into other churches, or maybe they're watching online for a bit, or maybe they're not really doing much of anything. It's happening everywhere. And it's the same problem that Jesus dealt with in Peter. Peter knows about Jesus, has heard about him, has seen his action up close, and he's just not all that interested in Jesus. He's over there cleaning his nets. He's in the boat, disinterested from what's going on. He's somewhat present, but he's not really there. Maybe he's there in person, but not really in his mind, not really listening, even after all that Jesus has done. Maybe we're in the same boat. Is it possible, likely even, that we've seen God work in our lives? We've prayed and it's not been answered the way we wanted to, but we have prayed some, and it has been answered the way that we wanted it to be answered. And so we've seen God at work in our lives, maybe. We've found his forgiveness at some point. We have seen his power at work. Maybe we walked down the aisle one day, let the preacher baptize us, and so we're a Christian, but we're just a little bit disinterested from what's happening with Jesus today. You ever been in that boat? Are you in that boat now? I would say, my suspicion is that the greatest threat to the church in America are not the things that we usually focus on as enemies. My suspicion is that the greatest threat to the church in America is not abortion or homosexuality or abortion rights. Greatest threat to the American church is probably not gender issues. It is apathy. It's superficial Christianity. It's staying on the surface and never going any deeper. It's a take it or leave it approach to faith that leaves many of us and our family members and our children leaving it because there's disinterest. We're there maybe in person, but not really paying attention, aware of Jesus, but not really in with what he's doing. And so Peter's over there cleaning his nets while the Son of God keeps trying to draw him nearer. And we may be in the same boat. Little too busy with what's happening at work, little too busy with what's going on at home, little too concerned maybe with the family issues that we've got, familiar with Jesus, but not really paying attention, just a little bit disinterested. Are you in the boat? Are you in that boat? Disinterested right there with Peter. The words of Jesus are going to be very simple. Go a little deeper. Well, why in the world would I want to go a little deeper? Not really interested right now. I like how things are. Why would I want to go deeper? Well, that's a good question. Not ready to answer it just yet, but it is a good question. Hang on a little bit. Look at verse 3. And so Jesus has commandeered one of the boats. It's Peter's boat. Getting into one of the boats, verse 3, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and he taught the people there from the boat. That's verse 3. Well, what's happening is the crowds have grown to the point where they are all around Jesus, and they can't hear what he is saying. Sound travels about 7 times more effectively on the water than it does on the land. And so Jesus needs a pulpit, and it's going to be a boat. He sees a boat, it's Peter's, and he says to Peter, take me out a little bit, let's go a little deeper. I need to preach to these people. What you may not see is that Peter doesn't really have a choice in this matter. In their culture, it's an honor-shame kind of culture, and so if somebody does you a favor, you are basically honor bound to do the favor back to them, to return the favor. And so when Peter has his mother-in-law, his family member, healed, he is in a position of indebtedness to Jesus. And so whenever Jesus calls in that favor, Peter really doesn't have a choice in it. So Jesus approaches Peter and says, I need your boat, take me out. Can't really say no because Peter owes him one. Not really in a position to say no. Would have been shameful and dishonorable to do that. And so he has to, he's duty-bound, obligated to say yes to whatever Jesus demands of him. He may not want to be there, may not want to give Jesus a ride in the boat, but there he is in the boat with Jesus out of obligation. Do you know that boat? Have you been in the same one? Are you there maybe right now? You're here today, and I got to tell you, I am absolutely glad that you're here. You could have been anywhere else, but you're here worshiping God today. And I will not presume to know why you are here, why you got up, why you came to church. It's a dreary morning today. I will not presume to know why. I hope and I trust and I believe that's because you want to be here. I'm also not naive enough to know that everybody's in that same boat. You, like Peter, you may have had a long night. Kids were up late. The baby was up early. May have been tough to get up this morning, and probably would be happier if church was held after lunch or something like that. But, you're here. The kitchen needs cleaning. The house needs swept. Things need to get done at home. You got a to-do list that's a mile long, and you really would have liked to gotten started on it this morning, but you are here. I don't presume to know what the answer to this question is for you. There's no way I can know what it is for you, but I want to ask you, are you here out of duty, out of obligation to someone, to something, or to Jesus? Now, don't get me wrong. Doing good things, even if it is from the wrong motive, can be good for us. If we continue to do good things, even though we may not feel like doing those things, it forms us into the kind of people who long for and want to do those good things. But I also know that you may be here because you feel obligated to be here this morning. And maybe it's obligation you feel to Jesus. You think about what he's done and how maybe he's offered you forgiveness and you owe him something for him giving his life for years. And so maybe you're here out of obligation to him. Or maybe you're here out of obligation to someone else, somebody that's in the room this morning, and you knew that if you didn't get up and go to church this morning, then it was going to be a pretty uncomfortable afternoon. And so you're obligated to be here because of someone else and what they think about you. Or maybe you're obligated just to yourself because you have this mindset maybe that says, I got to go to church because I don't want to lose my salvation. I got to go to church because I don't want God to be mad at me or something like that. So maybe you're compelled by Jesus or by somebody else or maybe by yourself, and you're here, and that's great, but is it out of obligation? If you're in that boat with Peter, the words of Jesus are simple. You need to go a little deeper. Why in the world would I want to do that, right? I'm here, and it's a chore, and it was a drudge to get up this morning and come, but I'm here out of obligation. Why would I want to do anything else? Why would I want to go deeper? It's a good question still. Just not ready to answer it. Verse 4 finds another boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered him, Master, we toiled all night, and we took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets. Do you hear what Simon Peter is saying to Jesus here? He's finished his sermon. Jesus has preached the sermon, and maybe Peter thinks that the service is over and we get to go back home and let Jesus off the boat, and I'm going to go home and get a nap before I get up and do the whole thing over again tonight. And Jesus says, no, Peter, let's go a little deeper. Launch out into the deep. Let's try to catch some fish. And Peter's thinking, what's he doing? We're the professional fishermen here. He's a carpenter. We spent all night on that water. That's when the fish are caught. He wants us to go to the deep end, and that's not where the fish are. They're in the shallow parts. We're fishing with the wrong tools at the wrong time of the day in the wrong place, and not to mention, we just cleaned the nets. Been laboring away, toiling away, cleaning up all these nets. Why would I want to go fish when it seems foolish, not going to catch the fish? I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong stuff, and the nets are clean. Who is he to tell us, professional fishermen, how to fish? I don't think they would have taken very kindly to that. I think they would have known better than to think they can catch fish that way. And so the words of Jesus here would have been probably a bit inconvenient to these fishermen who'd worked all night and were looking forward to getting some sleep. Would have been a little irrational. It doesn't make sense. That's not how you catch fish. And would have been pretty irritating. Foolish. Not going to do us any good. Wrong time, wrong part of the day. These commands of Jesus don't make any sense. Who is he to tell us what to do? Who is he to tell us how to live? That's the boat that Peter's in. He's reluctant to do what Jesus compels him to do. You know that boat. Have you been in the same one? Are you there now? And you know Jesus, and you know his teachings, and you've read some of the Bible, but you still think this is outdated. This is an antiquated way of viewing life. These teachings from 2,000 years ago, they don't make a whole lot of sense for us today. Why would I let them govern my life and my thoughts and my actions and my behaviors? Love your neighbor as yourself. Who does that? Love my enemy? Are you kidding? Nobody. That's not the way the world works. Return not evil for evil, but good for evil. Who lives that way? Somebody's going to take advantage of you. Overcome the problems of greed and lust and wrath and all the other really fun. Nobody does that. Seems foolish. So maybe you're in the boat of reluctance and just not ready to go forward with that kind of life. Well, it is an old way of living. It is an old way. It's ancient. It is a way that really not a whole lot of people live that way anymore. It's not really how the world works, and thank God that he showed us a better way. Thank God that he showed us how the world should work. But I understand why we would be reluctant to live that way. It can be tough. It can be tiring. It's hard work. It wears you out, and it may make you seem like a fool, and it just doesn't make sense to live that way. So if you're in that boat with Peter, reluctant to really live out the teachings of the gospel, I understand. But his message is still the same. Let's go a little deeper. Why in the world would I want to go a little deeper? I don't want to put any more work into this. It's a good question. Almost ready to find an answer. Verse 6. When they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. Okay, well, that's a pretty good day for a fisherman. And they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. When they came, they filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, and he said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." Doesn't make sense. And the fishermen knew it. They'd been fishing all night. That's when you catch fish. They didn't catch any. And Jesus says, go fish in the day. And they think, that's dumb. It's not going to work. They're fishing in the wrong place. They know that in the Sea of Galilee, where you catch the fish is by the shore. And Jesus says, go to the deep water, launch your nets out there. And they know this is not going to work. But lo and behold, the carpenter from nowhere near a body of water teaches these professional fishermen something about fishing that day. It doesn't make any sense. They brought in more fish than Peter had ever caught, and it doesn't make any sense. None of it does, except Peter's response. He falls down at the Lord's knees and says, "Depart from me, I am a sinful man." That part makes sense, and here's why. Peter had dreamed of this day. I mean, he's a professional fisherman. As a budding young fisherman, he longed for the day when he caught so many fish that his nets were breaking. People at the docks, they probably talked about these things. Their fish stories would grow and grow and grow, but they were all lies. Nobody had ever seen anything like this because nothing like this had ever happened. But on this day, out in the deep water where it didn't make any sense, in the middle of the day when it didn't make any sense, it did happen. And when a man like Peter, who makes his living and provides for his family and supports his community by catching fish, when he sees something like that, you know what he's thinking. Pretty sure that Jesus has found the treasure, the honey hole that nobody else knows about. Peter's pretty sure that Jesus has found the deep treasure of fish where all the big ones are in the sea. And nobody knows about it, and nobody needs to know about it. His boat is sinking with all the fish, and he could have yelled for help. I think that's what most of us would have done. We're not professional fishermen. My boat's sinking because too many fish. I'm going to yell and scream and make a fool of myself until somebody recognizes I need help and they come over and help bear the load. But read it again. That's not what Peter does. His nets are full. They're breaking. And in verse 7, he uses a word that in my Bible is translated signaled. He didn't yell. There's a Greek word for that. Luke didn't use it. There's a word for scream or to really make a lot of noise and get somebody's attention. There are Greek words for that. Luke doesn't use them. Luke uses a word that means motion, beckon. Get their attention without making any noise. Now, why in the world would somebody whose boat is sinking because of all the fish and their nets are breaking because of all the fish and they need a little help with all the fish they're catching, why would they not make a peep? Why would they not make a sound? You know the answer, right? Because there are other fishermen around. And if they figure out where you're catching all these fish, then you know where they're going to be fishing tomorrow. And Peter doesn't want them fishing there tomorrow because Peter plans on fishing there tomorrow. Keep it a secret. We got something good here. Let's come back tomorrow. At this point, Peter has zero intention of leaving his newly lucrative fishing business. Somebody did the math, all right, excavated some ancient boats from the Sea of Galilee that were found a few years ago. And so they figured out how much weight those boats could hold, and it comes out to about 31,000 pounds of fish. That's a lot of fish. And Peter's got 2 boats. And both of those boats are sinking 62,000 pounds of fish. You do the math, and that comes out to a dollars equivalent to 25 years of a fisherman's wages. In one morning, Jesus and Peter catch enough fish to make enough money to provide for his family for 25 years. Peter's a fisherman, and you know what he's thinking. We're going fishing tomorrow. But then he looks at Jesus, and the wheels are spinning, and he's starting to make sense of this whole situation. He looks at Jesus, and he's got to be thinking, this man, this Jesus, who just caught all these fish, 62,000 pounds of fish, when he shouldn't have done it, at a time when they shouldn't be biting, in a place where they should not even be at this point in the day. Jesus knows something about this. He could have won the fishing lottery every day of his life, but he chooses to not do it. Peter's thinking, this is all I've ever dreamed of. This is all anybody that's a fisherman's ever dreamed of being able to have this every day of our life. Jesus could have won the fishing lottery every day, but he doesn't choose to pursue it. Instead, Peter looks at Jesus and realizes he was at my house, not fishing when he could have been fishing and catching all these fish and making millions of denarii. Instead, he's at my house healing my mother-in-law. Instead, he's down at the synagogue every Saturday preaching the message. Instead of becoming a multi-millionaire, Jesus is going around poor and a lot of times homeless, just helping the people around him. And at that point, it's, Lord, depart from me, a sinner. What's Peter doing? You see what he's doing? He knows who Jesus is, the one who could have it all, could have incredible wealth and all the fish he ever wanted, and all the money he ever wanted, and all the power and acclaim and authority that he ever wanted, but he chooses not to hold on to that, but to give it all up, to empty himself, to take upon the form of a servant, and he will go and die the death on the cross for our sake. So, Lord, depart from me, a sinner. Peter must be struck with the realization of who Jesus is compared to who Peter is. Jesus is the one who could have it all, but chooses to give it all up for the sake of others. And Peter is the one who wants it all, and he's just not really sure he's ready to give up his grasp. They want to go fishing tomorrow. And so Peter knows exactly, following the lead of Jesus, he knows exactly what he should do. And worse, Peter knows exactly what he would do with the power of Jesus. He could catch enough fish tomorrow morning to support his family for 25 years. Then what? Go fishing the next day and catch a few more fish? And then what? Go fish? And then what? Go fish? And maybe Peter starts to realize there's got to be more to life than this. He knows what he should do. And worse, he knows what he would do with that power. And so Peter is torn. Lord, depart from me, a sinner. The light has shined into the life of Peter, and the dark areas of his life have become abundantly clear. Against the backdrop of Jesus and his love and his humility and his emptying of himself and the life that he chooses to live, Peter's flaws are unmistakable. Lord, depart from me, a sinner. He knows what he ought to do, knows what he should do, but he knows what he would do if he had the abilities and the power that Jesus has. He is not ready to surrender his will to God's. He's torn. He knows there's something special about Jesus, something extravagant about Jesus. He's seen the power up close in his life. He wants to follow Jesus, but he also wants to go fishing tomorrow. When the light shines in the darkness, it can be very uncomfortable, and that's where Peter is in that boat. You know that boat? Have you been in that same boat? Are you in that boat now? You know your sin and your temptation better than anybody else. They are yours. They're your temptations in part because you like them. Like Peter, you like the idea of going fishing tomorrow for whatever it is. They are your desires. Otherwise, they would not be very tempting to you in the first place. And so, yes, I want to follow Jesus, heard about Jesus, know he does a lot of good things, gave his life for mine, want to follow him, want to surrender my life to him. But like Peter, maybe you are torn today. You wanted to go fishing tomorrow, and you may be thinking of what you're going to find today or tonight, and you're torn because you like it, because it's your desire. And if you're torn in that boat with Peter, the words of Jesus are every bit as simple. We need to go a little deeper. Why? Why would I give up what I like? I like it because I like it. It makes me feel good. I'm not sure that I want to stop. I'm not sure that I want to cut it off. Why go deeper? It's a good question, and we're almost home. So if you look at verse 10, so also were the James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. They're impressed as well. And Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people. When they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and they followed Jesus. And so what you see, I think, at the end of the story is that Peter has not only been brought to his knees by Jesus, he's not going to be left there. Peter, Jesus says, don't just stay down there. It's okay. Today you can stop fishing for fish. You can start fishing for people. So get up and let's go. You and me are partners now, Jesus says. And so Peter gets up, left all his boats, his newly booming fishing business, the incredible catch of fish that was still in the boats, and he follows Jesus. And things are different for Peter from that point forward. Now he's in deep. Now he's in the boat that has gone deep with Jesus, not into the water anymore. They've made it to the shore. Now he's in deep with the one who walks on the water. And now he's in deep with the one who brings new life out of the water. We are baptized into Christ, sins washed away, and we come out of that water to live a new kind of life. That's the boat that Peter's in. He's in deep. He's gone deeper. Is that the boat that you're in? Do you know that boat? Ever been in it? Ready to be in it today? Ready to go a little deeper. Now, Peter had to leave all to follow Jesus. I will not tell you that he makes the same claim on us. We probably don't have to leave all to follow Jesus, but we probably do have to leave something behind. And so let me ask you this morning, what is it that you may have to leave behind in your life to go a little bit deeper in your walk with Jesus? What is it that's holding you back? What is it that's keeping you out of the boat? What is it that is holding you back from being the kind of person that Jesus wants you to be? If you're not in the boat yet, the words of Jesus are simple. It's time to go a little deeper. Why would I want to do that? It's a good question. And I think we're finally ready to find an answer. The only reason that Jesus gets Peter to go deeper, the only reason that Peter goes from, in verse 1, not even being interested in Jesus, only acting out of obligation or compulsion from Jesus, really not believing that what Jesus says is real and meaningful and valid for his life, he goes from that to the point where he is all in, leaving all, following Jesus wherever he goes. The only difference is at some point he looked at Jesus and learned who he is, what he means for life. He looks at Jesus with more power and more wealth than anybody in the world has ever had, but he sees Jesus give it all up. Didn't have to, but that's what God does. He looks at Jesus, able to win the fishing lottery every day of his life, to make millions and millions of dollars every day of his life, and he sees Jesus empty himself, become a servant, and knows that he's going to give his life on the cross for the world. And so to answer the question of why would I want to go deeper, I think I would answer with, why would you not? This Jesus came and gave all for us to change our world, to change the world, and it may very well start with us today if we're going to go a little deeper. Because deeper is where you go when you're convicted by Jesus. Deeper is where we land whenever we surrender our lives. And that's easy to say, okay, I surrender my life to Jesus. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about every part of life. Every boat, every net, every screen, every relationship, every desire, every attitude, and every action surrendered to Jesus. When we go deeper, we find out what really matters in life. It's where we find life, and it's really where we help others find life. And so why would I want to go deeper? Why would you not? One interesting side note at the end of this, in verse 7, whenever they catch all these fish, the word used is they have enclosed these fish. The nets go down around the fish, and they come up over the fish, and the fish are enclosed, hauled onto the boat on the way to die at the marketplace. The word that Jesus uses for what Peter's going to do for the rest of his life in verse 10 is not the word enclosed. It's a word that means set free to new life. The idea that Peter's job now will be to go out and to change the world one person at a time as he sets them free to enjoy new life. Think about what the world would have missed out on if Peter never decided to go beyond his disinterest and his sense of obligation to serving Jesus. If Peter never decided to go beyond, I don't believe this, it's foolish. If Peter never went deeper, how many people go without hearing the gospel? If Peter never went deeper, who preaches the sermon at Pentecost where 3,000 people are saved? If Peter never goes deeper, who walks around the towns healing people in the book of Acts? If Peter never goes deeper, we never get to read 1 Peter and 2 Peter. If Peter never in that boat goes deeper than where he was, the world is not quite as bright as it is today. So do you want to go deeper? Why would I want to? Well, maybe you can help people who are in bad boats find better ones. Do you want to change the world? Do you want to change that person's world? Do you want to make the world a better place? Do you want to make your world a better place? Then you may need to go a little deeper. And so I want you to think as we close this out this morning, what boat am I in? Am I there with Peter, really disinterested? I'm here on a Sunday morning, but I'm pretty disinterested in what Jesus is doing in life. Are you in that boat? Could you go a little deeper? Are you in the boat that, I will do what the Lord tells me to do and what Scripture tells me to do, but it's really out of compulsion and I feel obligated to do it. It's not out of a sense of joy and peace and love. Could you go a little deeper? Or you look at the commands of Jesus and you see what he tells us to do, to love our neighbors as ourselves and love our enemies and pray for those who would never pray for us and do good for those who would never do anything good for us and not return evil for evil, but good for evil. And you say, I don't believe that. I think that's a foolish way to live. If you're in that boat, could you go a little deeper and find a better way to live? Are you torn this morning? Are you in that boat? Knowing what you should do, but also a little bit afraid of what you will do. Even though you know better? Are you in that boat? And can you go a little deeper? What boat are you in this morning? Whichever one it is, can you go a little deeper into the water? Maybe you're in a boat this morning and you need to be in the water of baptism to begin this journey with Jesus of living a better kind of life. Maybe this morning what you need is to get in the boat that goes into the deep with the Lord. I don't know what boat you're in, but maybe you need to go a little deeper. He came to change the world forever. He changed Peter's life forever. He came to bring life to a group of people, the church, and he has charged the people that he gives life to bring that life to the people around them. He came to change the world, and it may very well start with us going a little bit deeper.